Good afternoon and welcome to the STS-40 Post-Flight Crew Press Conference. I would like to introduce once again our commander of the flight, Brian D. Oconor, and turn it over to him. Brian?
Thanks, Barbara. This is really great. We finally got our whole crew back to be able to talk to the American public. This is an interesting flight in that only 3 of us got to come back here to Houston right after the flight. The 4 payload crew members had to stay at Dryden for a lot of medical tests and experimentation on their bodies for another week. And so they just got back a few days ago. We've been doing some debriefings, and now we get to sit together and talk to you about what we did on this great mission. I'm going to introduce the crew here. To my immediate right is Sid Gutierrez, the pilot, and Tammy Jernigan, who is MS2, Mission Specialist number 2. She was the flight engineer for ascent and entry. We are the orbiter crew members. And then we have the 4 payload crew members, Jim Bajan and Ray Seddon, who are the NASA members of the payload crew. And then we have Drew Gaffney and Millie Hughes-Fulford, who are the payload specialist members of the payload crew. Without further ado, we'd like to show you what we did on this mission with a movie. And as we go through the movie, we'll talk through it. This is the crew patch. It shows SLS-1, Space Lab Life Sciences 1 as the logo. And this is what it looked like on the 5th of June that morning before we suited up. This is the crew in the suit room. We'd been through this once before, about 4 days prior, where we had gone out to the launch pad and had an abort due to an IMU problem. So by now we were getting kind of used to this routine. And as you see, the various crew members loading their pockets with the emergency equipment, putting the suits on. It may not show here, but we were really ready to go.
After several scrubs, it was time to fly. On launch day, Columbia performed flawlessly. Initially, you may recall the weather was no-go due to some low clouds, thunderstorms, and fog in the area. But after about an hour and a half of hold, a blue speck formed to the west. It moved over the pad, grew in size, and eventually we were cleared to launch. The SSMEs throttled to 100%, but when the SRBs lit, that's when we really knew we were going into orbit. We rolled to a 39-degree inclination to set us up for our flight. In first stage, we really knew we were flying a rocket. It was a solid E-ticket. Despite the hole in the sky, we did penetrate a cloud layer at about 14,000 to 16,000 feet. It was well within launch commit criteria, and it creates some beautiful imagery. You'll see a shadow formed by the sun falling on the rocket plume. You can see the shadow going off to the left there.
We opened the payload bay doors about 2 hours after launch to reveal just a spectacular view of the Earth. We also have a clear view of the Space Lab in the payload bay. The Space Lab was affectionately deemed slave quarters about halfway through the mission.
After we had configured the orbiter for space activities, we got to work activating the Space Lab. We spent about 2 hours setting up, checking out the environmental control system, the computers, and the communication systems. You'll see Sid as he heads back across the tunnel that we had to open to get back into Space Lab. After we performed the activation, we got to work on setting up all of the experiment hardware itself. Here you get to see the first view of the first working laboratory in space dedicated to the life sciences. You'll see the experiment hardware in racks along the sidewalls. We have overhead stowage containers and several pieces of equipment down the center aisle.
This is Jim performing an exercise test. You can see him breathing on a bag. That system with a gas analyzer allowed us to measure how much the body consumed in terms of oxygen, how much carbon dioxide it produced, and how exercise was affected during zero-G, and then compare that with pre- and post-flight. This was done in conjunction with the State University of New York at Buffalo and UT Southwestern in Dallas. This was the first time that we've actually measured maximal exercise capacity. This is, you see Ray and me doing an echocardiogram. This is an ultrasound test that allows us to image the heart, and with that we can see how much fluid shift has occurred, how the heart is expanded, and how well it's functioning in zero-G.
One of the other core experiments we had was the pulmonary function test experiment, and that was sponsored by the University of California at San Diego. And what we're measuring here is differences in the way the lungs function in weightlessness and how gases exchanged in weightlessness versus on 1G here on Earth. All the crew participated in that experiment. Here's Drew doing the barrel reflex experiment. What this does is it puts various amounts of pressure on your neck at the pressure receptors that help govern your blood pressure. And by understanding how we change our ability to regulate blood pressure in orbit versus here, it gives us a better handle on the kind of problems we see during entry with blood pressure regulation.
This experiment was designed to look at changes in blood flow and the compliance of blood vessels in the lower extremity in 0G. It's also from the University of Texas in Dallas. Blood pressure cuff is pumped up on the thigh, and then we measure changes in size of the calf.
Here I am spinning Jim in the rotating chair. We're testing his vestibular response in zero gravity. This was sponsored by MIT. It's much like going in a merry-go-round. When you stop suddenly and throw your head down, we're testing to see how quickly we get rid of that opposite reversal spin that we feel. In this experiment, we instead of eye rotating, we put our head into a dome that's rotating, and then we measure the response by looking at how the eye responds to the feeling of vection, and we compare this to our responses on the ground.
The orbiter crew members volunteered to participate in a number of Space Lab experiments. We renamed them for simplicity. This particular experiment is officially called BMMD, or Body Mass Measuring Device. We called it Weighing Yourself. Several other experiments, the one you recall with the collar, we renamed that one Suck on Your Neck. It was officially the barrel reflex. And the pulmonary function test we called Blow in the Pipe. One of the advantages to working in space is the short drive time between your work and your home. Here you see it's about 15 to 20 seconds to get from the Space Lab back to the orbiter. This is Jim and Tammy transiting the tunnel. In addition to the primary experiments, we conducted many secondary experiments, including 12 getaway special or gas cans. They were activated from the flight deck, but they were actually located back behind the Space Lab. They included investigations of material science, plant biology, and cosmic radiation.
One of the other things that we in the orbiter crew spent a lot of time doing during the mission was measuring the air quality. This is one of several experiments that gathered in air samples and looked for things like microbes and particles. We also checked the sound levels in the vehicle. This is Sid. Looks like he's looking for water, but he's not. What he's doing is measuring the sound levels, and we did this on the flight deck, the mid-deck, and also back in the Space Lab.
On day 7, we conducted the Orbital Acceleration Research Experiment. We flew a number of maneuvers, including a loop, aileron roll, and a 360-degree flat turn. I'll challenge some of the pilots on Earth to match that last maneuver. We were studying the performance of a miniature electrostatic accelerometer device. We also installed an improved filter to help the performance of the humidity separator. It was located under the middeck, or down in the pit, as we called it, and this yielded some surprising information about fluid flow in a zero-G environment.
Brian and Sid are here preparing to do some Earth observations. We photographed the land, the water, and the clouds, not just for aesthetic reasons, but for the wealth of scientific data the photographs contain. Here we're passing through the Strait of Gibraltar. We're going obviously west to east, and on the left-hand side you see Spain, and the right-hand side is Morocco. The Mediterranean Sea is in the distance. Here we have a very nice view of southern Italy, including the island of Sicily. Next we'll be approaching Kuwait, and soon you'll have an unmistakable view of the oil fires that still persist in the Kuwaiti oil fields since the war.
Since I live in San Francisco, the California coastline was one of my favorite views out the window. And UC Berkeley was also another favorite view for all of us, since many of us went to UC Berkeley. Down the peninsula, we can see NASA Ames Research Center that had a lot of the research animals on board.
And coming up in the distance, you can see just about center of the screen to the right is the dry lake beds and the Edwards complex there, which we were going to land at about 4 days from the time we took this photo. Here's the East Coast coming up, and there's the Appalachians just going by the edge of the payload bay. You can see the Chesapeake Bay near the center right at the bottom, and the Delmarva Peninsula above that. You can see New Jersey, Delaware Bay, and up to the Philadelphia area, Manhattan Island, Long Island, and all the way up, in fact, to Cape Cod, and that was a pretty nice sight.
One of the hardware test objectives that we flew on this flight for the Ames Research Center was to see if particulates and liquids could be contained within this general purpose workstation. Here you see me squirting strawberry punch out of a drink container, and you can see that the fluid tended to want to stick on the walls. The particulates that we released from this balloon were entrained a little bit in the airflow, which goes from the top of the cabinet down to the bottom.
We showed that we can handle the cages and keep the rats healthy, but we also wanted to be sure that the animals could be handled and taken care of and worked with as they are on Earth. And it turns out it's exactly the same. The rats are very comfortable being held like this. This is what you do in a laboratory on Earth. Works the same in space.
Both rats and human beings lose both bone and muscle during space flight. And during our flight, we took many samples of blood in order to test the changes in the hormones in our blood systems during flight. And we believe that perhaps is part of the reason we're losing the bone and the muscle during flight. And that was a nice exchange of tubes. It took at least 2 to 3 of us to do the blood draws because it was complicated.
This experiment uses lymphocytes, or white blood cells, to investigate changes in our immune system that occur when we leave the 1G environment of Earth for the 0G environment of space. Here we're injecting the cultures with a mitogen that promotes cell division, and by comparing our 1G control cultures in our centrifuge with our 0G cultures, we can determine if lymphocyte proliferation is decreased when you go to orbit, and thereby may adversely affect our immune system.
As many of you know, we had some trouble with the refrigerator and freezers during our flight, and here's a picture of Jim and Sid cleaning the filters in order to help the refrigerators and the freezers work more efficiently. This is where we put our blood samples, so it was a very important event to keep them running.
Here we're preparing to take some camcorder footage of our jellyfish crew members. Jellyfish contain gravity receptors that are analogous to the otolith organs in the inner ear, and by taking a look at the behavior of the jellyfish whose gravity sensing organs have developed in 0G, we can compare that swimming behavior to their 1G counterparts. One thing that you'll notice here is that the jellyfish tend to swim in circles and arcs, whereas on the ground they simply swim to the top of the flask and float down. This is a test of the medical restraint system for possible use on space station. My brave patient Sid here is allowing his astrophysicist to test his reflexes. I told Sid if he didn't move his knee, I'd just have to hit him harder the next time. So he became more cooperative. And this is simply a demonstration of performing CPR in 0G. It is quite feasible. This is Recessa Annie that I'm performing the CPR procedure on, and she is strapped to the middeck lockers.
The breaking of bread in space took on added meaning on this flight since we were keeping track of all of our liquid and fluid intake for the metabolic studies that we were doing. We've kept track of everything that we've taken in from a few weeks before flight up until the present time. We're looking at changes in nutrient metabolism and probably in food preferences too. Here we are at a typical dinner beginning to chase our food around. And of course, it was always a challenge even to try and stay clean on a 9-day flight without a good shower. Here Drew is shampooing his hair with a waterless shampoo that we had on board, and it worked pretty well, at least for people with short hair or no hair.
Yeah, I'll vouch for that. They had warned us that we know that various orbiters have slightly different sounds to them, and about midway in the mission, we noticed a sound emanating, it seemed like from, we weren't sure where in the middeck, and trying to discover what it was, and Brian and Tammy were looking around, and they seemed to finally locate it down in the LIO storage area there. But it turned out that, for some reason, Sid was down there. Well, once we had solved that problem about what was causing the noise, we really weren't too worried about it, so Tammy just buttoned it back up and went back to work. About the 6th day, everybody was ready for a little bit of recreation. We knocked the bike back down in the stove position, and everybody kind of went back for a little bit of gym time back in the Space Lab. And here you'll see what we think is probably the world's record, and probably for the solar system too, the number of people on someone's back doing a push-up. Sid's on the bottom, and Drew's on the top, and you can see Sid really pumping these push-ups out. But we think it was probably tougher on the people near the top, like Drew and myself, as we were slamming into the lockers overhead. And we did not stop because of Sid's lack of stamina, but rather Drew's pain threshold and my own, probably.
The day before landing, we fired up one of the auxiliary power units and ran through a checkout of the orbiter flight control system and the RCS jets. Since brushing your teeth in zero-G is difficult at best, we made liberal use of chewing gum to facilitate working in close quarters.
We closed the port payload bay door about 3 hours and 20 minutes prior to the deorbit burn. Soon you'll see evidence of possible interference of the environmental seal with the door closure, and also you can see the loose thermal blankets that Jim's going to talk more about later.
Then came entry day, or entry time. We all got dressed in our orange suits. This is Jim, who was rotating back and forth between middeck and flight deck, helping people get in their suits and so on. And here you see our 2 stalwart payload specialists in their suits ready for entry on the middeck. This is a shot taken out the top of the window, and you can see that phantasm that other people have reported where the ions are recombining behind the vehicle as you come down through the atmosphere, and you can see the reflection off of Sid's back there. We came down through entry, did several aerodynamic test inputs. The winds were nice, and we were scheduled to land on runway 22, the concrete runway at Edwards. One of the things that we had to do on this landing was to land a little faster than normal because we were a heavyweight vehicle. And also we did a high-speed nose wheel steering test to open up the envelope for the nose wheel steering system on the shuttle. As the nose comes down, you can see the big speed brakes out there on the top of the shuttle to help slow it down.
One of the things you probably saw on this flight different from all the other shuttle flights is that we didn't walk down the stairs out of the vehicle. This crew transport vehicle, which is an airport transfer bus, was outfitted so that we can get the crews out very quickly, get them changed, and start doing medical tests and look at the condition of the crew immediately on landing instead of the 45 to 90 minutes that it usually takes. This is really going to help us in the future to get the crews out quickly and get the medical studies that we need for planning our longer duration flights. Plank was not used.
Well, we're hearing from the scientists that we had a very successful mission scientifically. This is our crew when we posed for our picture months before the launch. The smiles reflect how we feel today about this flight and all the people that helped support it and make it go.
This was taxiing into the ramp, our second launch attempt, getting ready to go for our mission. And again, as you saw there by that little bit of a lead-in, a lot of things go on leading up to a flight and a lot of training, and that was a little bit of a summary of it, just to try to encapsulate that time frame of the flight. This is about 7 a.m. We're getting our launch and entry suits on and getting them all checked out before we go out to the vehicle. It's going out to the crew van. I think if I could remember the time, about, I'd say 7:50 in the morning. Out on the pad, and about this time during the count, you really start putting your thinking hat on because you got to go to work, and main engines start running, and we run them for about 6 seconds. The computers make sure they're good, and all the smart people have figured out how to make all that work, and that's amazing to me that we have people in our country that know how to do that, and bang, boosters light up. Boy, those people at Thiokol have been doing a great job as far as I'm concerned with all their new processing techniques and all their new safety inspections. In fact, I think the first 2 minutes, 10 seconds of this ride is the safest time during that time frame. It doesn't bother me at all. I've watched those people at Thiokol, really proud of them. And we sure had a good ride here. Mike?
Right now it's probably about a minute and a half into ascent, getting ready for the solid rocket motors to separate. It's kind of a nice shot here. You can see the shock waves on the orbiter and on the external tank.
We pushed the limits this time a little bit more of the envelope, went to a higher dynamic pressure than we've been to before.
At this point it's probably about 2 Gs, 2 to 2.5 Gs. The ride is a little bit rough on the solids. It smooths out quite a bit once you get rid of the solid rocket motors. There they go. Another close-up shot of the SRB SEP.
That makes your front windows in front of Bakes and I go opaque. They literally just go opaque.
A very bright flash when they come off.
And they're of course, the Rocketdyne engines keep on running, and boy, those motors are complex, and I see all those people, and they do a great job making those engines run.
Our major activity on the first flight day, besides the launch, was to launch the TDRS IUS complex. Here we are, we're up at 58 degrees and getting ready for the deploy. Inside the cockpit, there's a lot of activity. It takes all 5 crew people working together to launch something like this. Jim and I were the primary people that were involved in checking the IUS systems, making sure everything was ready for deploy. And Mike's job was to make sure that the shuttle was in the proper attitude for the deploy. David was the person that did all the fine photography, and it's his work that we're looking at right this minute. And then John's job was just to make sure all the rest of us were doing our jobs. And when we actually did the deploy, it looks like it's coming out sort of in slow motion. It's not, that's real time. And the thing that always surprises you is how close it gets to the vehicle. And we were all looking out and commenting on how close it was to the vehicle. And then John puts in some impulses to move the shuttle away from the IUS. And you can see this in just a minute as we begin to move away. Now, to do a deploy involves not only the crew people inside the shuttle, but involves all the people in mission control that are monitoring systems. It also involves people out at Sunnyvale who are monitoring the IUS systems. It involves people at Boeing. It involves the people up at Goddard who are looking at the TDRS systems. So you can see it's a huge teamwork of people, a big network of people all across the United States that are involved in launching something like this satellite. Now, our job as a shuttle crew ended as soon as we got the satellite out of the bay, and then a little bit later as we backed away from it. But then people had to continue to monitor as the IUS was bringing the TDRS on up to geosynchronous orbit. Now, after we got rid of our major payload, then the activity sort of focused down in the middeck. We sort of looked at the middeck as the place where we do our eating and our sleeping, and it's also our laboratory that we have on orbit. And here I am working with a biomedical manufacturing module. And this module has flown before, and it's going to fly several more times. And it has several syringes, and then you can put in different samples. And the samples that we had, we were growing different types of cells and cell culture to see if they would manufacture different amounts of enzymes that would be of use in a later type of manufacturing process. And the middeck is a very, very valuable asset that we as a country have to do all these types of experiments.
As Shannon has indicated, we turned the shuttle into a flying laboratory after we deployed the IUS TDRS satellite. And here you're seeing us perform, Shannon and I are performing one of about a dozen physical science type experiments. We had about an equal number of medical supplementary objectives or experiments on board. This particular one is a setup for an optical coupler that actually transmits video and audio signals through fiber optics and through video couplers in the windows that you see here. This is really a test to find out if it's practical to use fiber optic technology to transmit audio and video type signals in and out of the cargo bay from the crew compartment of the shuttle. You're seeing a whole maze of fiber optic cables here that I'm manipulating there, and also the audio and video signals that come from the TV monitors and go to the videotapes that we have on board the shuttle. Shannon and I did a series of experiments using this equipment and took about an equivalent of about 3 hours of data on videotapes to bring back for analysis to find out how good a quality we could maintain and what the practicality is of doing this in the shuttle. This is another experiment where we undertook to analyze the propagation of flame fronts in solid materials, in this case an ashless filter paper that's inside a containment. I'm igniting it here with push button. You see the flashing light. In a moment you'll see the flame. You'll notice that the flame is round. It doesn't point up like a candle flame. In zero gravity, a flame forms a sort of a ball flame front as the paper burns. We've got a series of thermocouples attached to the filter paper above and on the paper to determine what the nature of flame propagation is in zero gravity.
Okay, this is a view of the payload bay, and on the right side you can see Cher. Cher was the space station heat pipe advanced radiator element. It's a mouthful, but we took that up. It consists of two heat pipes, which you can see here, that we tested for use on space station. These would reject heat on space station. You could use many of these elements in a row, basically, and the advantage is that there's no moving parts, no pumps involved. If they were to take a meteorite hit, the whole system would still work, unlike the systems that we now use on the shuttle, for instance. The results of the test were excellent. It worked just as expected.
You know, one of the experiments that we did for the space station was evaluating different kinds of cursor control devices for use on board the data management system on the space station. We used a Macintosh computer and 4 different kinds of cursor control devices. Jim Adamson, Shannon Lucid, and myself evaluated those throughout the mission.
One of the privileges that we had on this mission was to fly some new software and some new computers. The first time that the combination had ever flown together on the space shuttle. We've upgraded both systems, and among the software changes that we've made is a new digital autopilot for flying on orbit called an alternate digital autopilot. And in this particular scene, I'm working with John to do a series of 22 flight tests on the digital autopilot to find out what kind of responses it provides for the vehicle.
This is just a little view up on the flight deck that I put in just to show you 3 really great people working on orbit. This was in between while I had different clocks running on different things they're doing. I catch them like this every now and then, so I thought I'd capture this once on film. But it's really a neat thing to see all these human beings working in space so well with the ground, trying to get everything accomplished, and I just think a lot of that and think a lot of that capability that we have in the country.
This is another demonstration of some physical principles in zero gravity. You can see a pair of long-nose pliers there that are very stable in that mode. When you open them up a little bit, you can see that they've got 2 stable modes. You can see them flipping back and forth between those 2.
I saw David do this once, so I told him I had to get that on film.
This is Jim working on the aft flight deck for SSBUV, the Space Shuttle Solar Backscatter UV experiment, or data collector, actually. It took both of us essentially to work this secondary payload that's in a gas can out in the payload bay. I would maneuver the orbiter to either a Earth viewing attitude or a solar viewing attitude, and Jim would operate the APC to open and close the lid and start different modes of the SSBUV.
The experiment was housed in what we call a gas can, which stands for Getaway Special, and you can see the mechanical lid that we actually activated from inside the crew compartment using a little computer and entering inputs. Very fascinating experiment, not designed to measure the ozone layer, but actually to calibrate other satellites and instruments that do measure the ozone layer. What we would do is actually measure the backscatter ultraviolet rays directly emitted from the sun and also then backscattered off the Earth. So we would actually look at the sun with the experiment and then turn around and look at the Earth.
This was the Battelle Materials for Commercial Development of Space investigation of polymer membrane processing. The bottom line is microgravity, they can get some idea of the physical and characteristics of materials, and as a result develop improved membranes here on the planet to be used for to help better filters for liquids and solids. I think this is that was a sunrise, and this is up on the flight deck. It's just a nice picture of the flight deck in space. Me looking at the flight plan there, and it was something I did a lot, and so somebody took this picture of me once.
Yeah, we thought we needed a picture of John being the commander, keeping track of all of us doing our thing and making sure we stayed on the timeline. He's a great man to work for.
This is down in the mid-deck. Again, you'd see this a lot, different people trying to get different types of work done all in parallel, and so it's just a busy place on the mid-deck. Shannon in the medical kit here, I asked her to get me some sleeping pills, and while she was getting them, I thought I'd take a picture of her getting them for me. You can ask her about
Several of the experiments, the medical experiments that we did had to do with assessing the cardiovascular systems. This particular one was called blood pressure variability, in which we donned an automatic blood pressure cuff and a Holter monitor. You can see we were wired for sound right there, and for 24 hours, 3 different times during the flight, we had our heart rates and our blood pressures taking constantly. Bakes, John, and I all did that. In fact, we had to do that pre-flight 2 or 3 times, and we've also done that post-flight 2 or 3 times. John's giving us sign language there to say that it's measuring his heart rate there. Now, another one of the cardiovascular medical experiments that we did was running on the treadmill. John and I did that virtually every day for about 30 minutes per day. When we did this, we donned a heart rate monitor that went around our chest. We also had a watch on our wrist there that contained a readout of what our heart rate was, as well as a time. And during this 30 minutes, every 10 minutes, we would attempt to step our heart rate up to a higher level there. Again, John and I both did that on orbit. Jim was a control subject. He did it on the ground, and so we've got some some good data of all three of us pre and post flight.
You're going to see David enter the scene here. While I was running down there, I looked around once and saw this, and I thought that was quite amazing. He was trying to beat me running around the world, I think.
This was our hamster experiment.
It's much easier to run on that without these straps. Probably the biggest medical experiment that we had was called lower body negative pressure. And in this experiment, Bakes and I would slide inside that can there, if you will, which had a waist seal that would come up and seal around our waist, and we could lower the pressure inside that bag to about minus 50 millimeters of mercury, which is equivalent stress on your heart of standing up in 1G. Again, this took place during 4 separate days on orbit. And as you can see here with the lower body negative pressure device there, it took 3 people. It took up virtually the entire middeck whenever we did this. You can see Shannon Lucid was taking some ultrasonic images of our hearts while we were in that. She's got an American flight echocardiograph machine that is actually recording that data there. You've got the subject in the bag, and then you've got another person that is operating the controls down on the lower end there and entering the data, the heart rate and blood pressure data on board a Macintosh computer. And again, this took up the major portion of our days for 4 separate days while we were on orbit.
As I'm looking at this, I'm just thinking, I'll comment, the Space Shuttle is an absolutely incredible machine. I mean, it has tremendous flexibility, and you know, as you've seen here, we deployed a satellite on the first day, and then a tremendous amount of scientific and medical research for the rest of the mission, and a real national treasure. In fact, the only thing in the world that has this kind of capability. So, boy, Americans ought to be very proud of this system.
I might add also that I flew this on STS-32, and they've made some great improvements both in the comfort of the device as well as the hardware itself. It's more automated and easier to use now.
This is a picture on the flight deck. In between experiments, you'd catch different people with different cameras here. Bakes has a telephoto Hasselblad lens camera, and Jim had an IR filter on. Different people trying to take different pictures for oceanographers, meteorologists, and geologists all around the world. There are different requirements. This is a beautiful scene of our planet. It's just a big blue-white ball, basically. Blue planet's a good description from the IMAX movie. This is a little sequence where I caught Mike taking some pictures out of the pilot's window. This is looking into North Africa. You can see the Earth limb there at the top. Morocco, Algeria, Libya. The Mediterranean Sea, really quite beautiful, our planet. And of course, these pictures don't do it any justice, but they're the best we can return to you. Absolutely beautiful, this planet. Makes you realize there are no international boundaries, because I don't see the boundaries of any of those countries there, and but a real nice place. We need to take care of it. There's the Sinai, Red Sea, down into the Nile River Delta there. Really beautiful coming out of Cairo. Headed down south towards the Aswan Dam. Lake Nasser is coming to the scene here in a second. Real reason I'm showing you that is I'd flown on 2 other missions and I never saw the Aswan. This time I did.
As John has insinuated, Earth observation is one of the favorite pastimes on orbit for astronauts flying in space. And I think one of the things that impresses me the most about it is that since I was a young man going to high school, the geology books, as a result of the space program, have been almost totally rewritten, and the whole concept of plate tectonics and shifting continental shelves has really been totally rethought as a result of observations made in space.
This scene you're seeing right here is one of the bad scenes. That's all the Kuwaiti oil fires, burning, running south down into Saudi Arabia, and Boy, I saw that, and as murky as it looks there, that's just was the contrast that we saw in orbit. I mean, the planet's beautiful, and you got to that area, and boy, it looked like the planet was out of focus. There's no question the Kuwaiti oil fires are putting a lot of stuff into the environment, affecting the lives of 5 billion people and billions of animals and plants all over this planet, and hope we get those fires out soon. You're not seeing this real good, but you're looking into the velocity vector. People always say, what does it look like on orbit, as if you're on a space vehicle. Well, you're looking right down the velocity vector here, approaching the northwest portion of Australia. They're quite beautiful. You're moving at 17,500 miles an hour, and that's what it looks like. One morning, I was up eating breakfast, and while I was eating breakfast, this is what I was looking at. And I thought, boy, what a lucky person I am to be able to see this scene. Really a very beautiful planet, except when you see a scene like we saw there in Kuwait. It's another flight deck picture of some people taking pictures here of the hurricane that we saw. Mike, you may want to talk about that. You saw that a lot.
Yeah, we saw, actually we saw about 4 hurricanes on our flight. This was Hurricane FIFA, and we had the opportunity to fly right over the eye, which was really quite spectacular. The first rev or so that we saw this hurricane, the eye was not really well developed, and then when we, timing was perfect for us. As soon as the eye became developed, we flew right over it. If you keep your eyes on the top left of the screen, you'll see a shooting star just went by. It's kind of interesting to see that from space because you're looking down on it instead of up at it.
You saw different stars there. On the bottom is space, and the planet, of course, dominates the upper 7/8 of that picture, and this is a bunch of lightning storms going on. People always ask, what do they look like from space, so I thought we'd throw a little of that in this time. And I think this is the sunrise here, and we're getting ready for entry day. And you're going to see the payload bay doors coming closed. I think David came up with the camcorder and got a pretty good sequence of Jim and Shannon putting that in progress. On the left side there, the payload bay door is starting to close. Every time I see all this, I wonder how does it work? So much complexity, and I think it's really incredible. It's about 2 hours before the deorbit burn, roughly, about the time we close these doors. This is the entry time frame, and we're about 250,000 feet here, and out the front windows you can really see the glow come up with the fire. It's quite an amazing ride. Every time you do it, you say, wow, what an amazing vehicle and what a beautiful ride coming in. Jim took this photography.
As John has indicated, you spend most of your time on orbit falling around the Earth at about 17,500 feet a second, and in order to get back to Earth, the trick is to take some of that velocity out of your orbit and actually slow down, which causes you to fall back into the gravity field of the Earth. And in doing so, you generate an awful lot of heat, and some of the fire that you've seen shooting up over the top of the vehicle is a symbol of that.
Here we're going subsonic, coming over top the Kennedy Space Center and getting ready to turn on to the heading alignment circle. That's about 90 degrees of turn to go. When I looked out the far left window, it was clear blue down there, and by the time I got to the front window, I thought I was going into the LA smog. That's just what it looked like. Rolled out on final. Boy, all our shuttle training aircraft training we get, all of our training in the KC-135 and all that really pays off here. You feel like you're right at home. Biggs put the gear down, and Boy, what a beautiful, beautiful flying machine. To me, it's the easiest airplane to fly in the world in this time frame. But again, we get a lot of excellent training that makes it easy. It's kind of incredible to think that that vehicle lifts off on top of a bunch of rocket engines, pushing it out into space. You do all that stuff, and then it comes back in and it lands like this, like an airplane. Unbelievable. I don't know where we got all the people that knew how to make that work, but we do. Quite an amazing machine with tremendous flexibility to do many different missions, and of course we tell you about that every time you hear about a different mission.
A lot of people wonder why it takes the crew so long to get out of the vehicle after we land. And of course, going through the reentry and everything, we need some sort of cooling on board for all the avionics, and once we close the payload bay doors, we don't have the radiators anymore. So one of the things we use to cool the vehicle here is ammonia boilers, and the ammonia being given off by the ammonia boilers creates a kind of a cloud around the vehicle. And in this particular mission, we had to wait a little while to get out because there was a lot of ammonia outside blowing out of the ammonia boilers, and so it was pretty smelly trying to get out of the vehicle, so we had to wait a bit for that to clear.
This little scene is showing you the crew working on that flight deck after landing. We've got to do a bunch of little things, and I don't know if you've seen that before, so we thought we'd throw it in. Coming out of the vehicle here, again, I feel very privileged to have had such a great team of people to work with up in orbit, and wish them luck in any of their future endeavors. They're really a super group of people. And here's just a scene of the Kennedy space team putting the vehicle, getting it ready for STS-44 in November.